Welcome everyone to my presentation today on the topic of conducting user studies in engineering education during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today I'm going to be talking about the transformations that we did to adjust our virtual reality user study to the ongoing pandemic. So for that I'm going to give you some background information of our initial research questions, then how we went on to implement the transformations. I will talk about the results, and then we can have a look at some future work. So, as we all know, that in civil engineering, one of our main focuses are structural engineering. However, this kind of beam experiments and so on in a laboratory setting are really hard to establish and very expensive. So bringing, like this? Yeah, I'm short. Okay. So what was I saying? Beam experiments. We want to bring this into the virtual environment so we can adjust and experience these more often and integrate them into our everyday learning and teaching activities. So what we did was an application to introduce structural mechanics to university students, and the main objective is to understand the components of the equation of deflection for a simple beam, rectangular beam on two supports. What we wanted to measure was the effects of color coding objects in the virtual environment on the learning outcome and the cognitive load of the users. So we have 4 elements that we are looking for in the application. That is force, material, Young's modulus, and the moment of inertia. And in this classroom scene, we see these different beam experiments that we conduct. So how does color coding have an effect on learning outcome and the cognitive load? For this, we chose a between subject study design where we split a group into a color-coded and not color-coded group. And what we wanted to do was, in a laboratory setup, let them experience the environment in VR with HMD and the controllers. However, during pilot trials, we went into lockdown in March 2020. And we all know we had to move our workspaces to our homes, and there was a very sudden need to digitize in all areas, but also in educational institutions. So normally we have these in-person classes, and everything had to be changed into online and distance learning. And one of the challenging situations in our case for user studies was there were very few guidelines and practically no protocols for how to conduct user studies like in a safe and healthy manner. So we can't just be sending the equipment back and forth, and we didn't know how that would work. So this was one challenge. And the students were very hard to reach at that time, and many of them moved back to their homes, and it was a very stressful time also for them with travel restrictions and later on with Zoom fatigue. So what I want to focus now on is the transformations that we made for our planned user study to go into remote setting. We wanted to, our requirements were that we want to obtain our initial research questions, so the color coding factor was important, that we find out as much as possible, retain information, and the interactions as much as possible. During transformation, we also had to secure a robust workflow for the users, and what we want to concentrate now on is, so 3 things. How do we recruit participants in that time? What do we do with the pre and post tests, and also with what we transform in the application. So I'm going to talk about our original plan, the challenges, as well as the transformations that we did. So this application that we developed was supposed to be integrated into the civil engineering course plan, so and further developed with many other, not only beam structures, but also other elements that we see every day in our classes. We had planned to go into topic-related courses and recruit people in person. And for more exposure, we wanted to use an additional platform. And due to the overnight closure of our university, like I said, we went from in-person to online, and the decrease we couldn't access our students as much anymore. So we chose some alternative information channels, and via email and Moodle platform, what we use anyway, we formulated a really information-packed recruitment mail where we talked about the structure of our study and the average completion time, the compensation incentives, and so on. And this email had a hyperlink that led to a website where users could download the application. So, like I said, a controlled setting was planned with the supervisor, who was supposed to also answer any questions that are from the learners. And in these pre and post tests, we want to find out through questionnaires how much of a prior knowledge users have, what their motivation is, and what their interests are, so we can also assess their learning outcomes. So if somebody already has some prior knowledge and then they perform well, that is something different, of course, to people that have very little prior knowledge. We had to take care that, since there is no supervision, that the questions have to be as self-explanatory as possible. So we did multiple work checkings and for comprehensibility, and in order for students to not preemptively cancel out, go out of the learning environment, we wanted to make a very clear structure and additional videos to support them. So going from this virtual reality environment and using the same Unity environment to use it for desktop, we used to have our input devices, our HMDs, and then to the classic mouse and keyboard setting at home. 2 things that we need to take care of in the application are the navigation. So many of you also know that in VR we teleport, we jump with our controllers. At home, games and so on, we can use our keyboard and mouse. So that had to be mapped. In addition, the manipulation of objects in this environment had to be changed from the picking up objects and so on with the controller to, like I said, mouse and keyboard. We had to also have a look at some post-analysis, for our post-analysis, what the users were doing during that time when they are answering the questions, when they are in the application, how they are moving, if they're looking for something or if something is maybe not easy to find. So we logged the user's motion, so view direction and their position in this virtual environment, and also their in-application responses. For that, we developed a workflow, and I know you can't see anything. I'm going to go into that now. So we invite our target audiences via mail with our online link, like I said, and when they respond to the invitation, we generate a unique ID and assign them to these two groups that I talked about. This information is uploaded to our servers, and after they complete the pretest, they go on to a link where they can download a self-extracting application. They can go through the application, play around, and then during that time, we log their data of movement and their answers. This is good for us to later on match these information to see which group was doing how. So after that is done, the application self-destructs. We don't have any more data on the local computer anymore, and they can go on to their post-test and complete that. So as a small summary, we need to consider the user needs and their hardware requirements when we're doing these kind of adjustments, and going from to increase accessibility, we went from our VR environment to our desktop application. In order to even more support the users, we had some additional explanatory videos and training videos, and to make it easy to use, we packed it in a self-extracting and destroying manner. During that time, we tracked the input and output of the users, and that was for us for later usage. And what we learned from this is that it's very easy to access people when you talk with them in person and you ask them, could you please come to my user study? And the personal contact is definitely the highest success rate for participation. The compensation is somehow okay, but it sometimes also gets complicated. I had many discussions with my students on what kind of a voucher they want, and they don't want to have Amazon and so on. So there's also some political statements in there. And we have to definitely use more resources for advertising this kind of remote studies. During the formulation of the pre- and post-test questions, we saw that there's a definite trade-off between how precise we formulate a question and how simple the presentation has to be. We have some preliminary results from quantitative evaluation. So what we saw in our first trial is that there is no main effect. Still looking at the original research question, there's no main effect of color coding in the general learning outcome. However, we can definitely see some effects on the field of application when you consider the covariate of prior knowledge. So our conclusion for that is remote studies offer flexibility in terms of time and location. However, we can't really control them. The biggest limitation is definitely in the recruitment process, and we used Windows as a platform, so there is definitely room for expansion on other systems. In our future work, we definitely want to test out some online platforms such as SideQuest, where the users have their own Oculus head-mounted displays at home. So, and we always have to consider how suitable is my research question for a remote study. So this is something that we need to take away and also, yeah, have a look at. Yeah, and questions in terms of implementation. So how do we construct our virtual environments in a way that we can use them more flexibly, and maybe in some kind of future lockdown or whatever, how would we would yeah, show that. So thank you for your attention, and I'm open for questions and suggestions.